Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. On October 18, 2007, my story began. I was driving east toward an interchange when I noticed a car coming across the median from the other side of the highway. Our two vehicles collided. The scenario unfolded so quickly. I recall realizing that I was going to die and that there was nothing I could do about it. I started to pray, and I remember telling God that I have accepted death, but I'm coming to you in an angry spirit because I thought I would be living long enough to see my children grow up and be with my loving wife who is expecting me at home. This was not going to happen, I realized. Then, there was the crash. Bam! I was unprepared because this was the most terrifying time of my life. The crash made a tremendous amount of noise. I remember hearing the terrible sound of metal, skin, and bone smashing together. I recall the airbags popping slowly. Then I was slammed into the windscreen and violently on the right side, hitting the doorpost and the left side. I was slamming side to side like a rag doll. I recall going unconscious. God was the last thing I said. Then I recall seeing a tunnel, and that was it. After that, I remember flying through the air and my spiritual self, feeling like I was on fire. I recall feeling warm and comfortable. My spiritual self felt so powerful that I could blow up the entire planet if I wanted to. When I looked at my right arm, I noticed a white light emanating from it. My skin was translucent. Then I entered my body through the car. I recall having some difficulty fitting into my body and rotating around in my spiritual self. My spirit frequency was higher than my body frequency. I was finally able to relax into my body. I was taking in the scenery. Everything was serene, and I was relieved to be back. Then, there was a serious issue. I returned to a physical body that was as wrecked and mangled as the car. Nothing was working in the body. I refused to believe that I returned to a crippled body, I said to myself as I became a little excited. I command this body to move. Then, I willed my right index finger to move, and it did. I was overjoyed to receive a response. I was still feeling all of my spiritual self's super energy, which I was able to channel onto the lifeless body that I had returned to. Then I tried to move my right foot's big toe. I managed to move my toe, but then I felt intense pain in my right upper leg. I knew it was broken. I began to breathe at that point, but I couldn't cry out for help. I had to practice moving my jaw while trying to move my larynx in order to bawl for assistance. It took some time, but I eventually was able to call for assistance. Someone came to the car after hearing my cries for assistance. My phone was on the left side of my waist belt. Because I couldn't use my left side of my body, I had to take it out of the casing and dial my home number with my right arm. I handed the phone to the stranger and told him to contact these people because I couldn't. A short time later, firemen arrived at the accident site and my brother soon followed. He was crying because he thought I had died. I had enough energy inside me to keep this from happening. My workers and wife then arrived on the scene of the accident. The ambulance arrived after about an hour and a half. They loaded me into an old fire ambulance. The shocks were so intense that I felt every bump on the way to the hospital, as if someone was hitting my broken leg with a hammer. The firemen in the ambulance with me did not lock the stretcher, and when the driver came to a stop, half of the stretcher almost fell out. The firemen had to use brute force to keep me from exiting the vehicle. We eventually arrived at the hospital. I was given 2 injections at the hospital, morphine and pethidine. None of the painkillers worked because the pain was so intense. The hospital worker carried me to the X-ray department, then to the casting room, where the doctors had to reset my broken leg by inserting a pin below my right knee and strapping weights to it. This is known as traction. I was depressed and in and out of reality while in the hospital. Because of my broken hip and leg, I was in a lot of pain. Because of my injury, I wasn't eating or urinating properly. I was having trouble breathing as well. Most importantly, I had no recollection of what happened between the accident and when I was flying through the air back into my lifeless body. Many religious people came to my bedside and told me to thank God I was still alive. I tried reading the Holy Bible for comfort, but it didn't work. It's most likely because I blamed God for my serious accident and felt I didn't deserve it. I prayed every day to remember what had happened. I knew I had died in that car accident. I told my wife about it, but she doesn't seem to believe me. The father of the young man driving the other vehicle paid regular visits to me. He was present when I confessed to my wife on that particular day. He told her that I did die because he ran across to the vehicle shortly after the accident. I was dead when he looked at me. He returned to his son's car, realizing there was nothing he could do for me. He heard me scream a short time later and assumed that the injury had likely shocked me back to life. I was in traction for 6 weeks and never got out of bed. I remembered what had happened one day while in the hospital. I recall being tossed around like a rag doll during the crash, and time seemed to slow down. As soon as I bawled, "God!" I remember a black tunnel and being totally out. Then I was transported to another dimension. I recall using my thoughts to construct planets. I sent them out with my thoughts and felt as if I'd been struck by lightning, but in a beautiful way. I witnessed the formation of my planets. I was weeping and hawing like you do when you first see fireworks. A female voice informed me that what I create is entirely mine. I then turned to look in the direction of the voice and saw her. She was an awareness itself. She was a huge orb of white light with many hands entering and exiting her. She was a conglomeration of billions of conscious minds. I knew I was part of her because I saw a white light in the shape of an umbilical cord connecting her to me. Then she was massaging my neck and treating me like a baby. The love I felt for her was greater than any other love I'd ever felt. I felt something inside of me, as if I hadn't completed a task. I couldn't recall what it was, but I knew I had to do it. I recall saying that I needed to return. I turned around, and there in front of me was this light being who appeared to be human. There were millions of light humanoid creatures all over the place as I looked around. There were no planets or stars in this place. Only light humanoid beings provided illumination. When I first saw him, I thought I recognized him. I hugged him. My feelings for him were intense. He felt more connected to me than my own family. He began communicating telepathically. When I told him I needed to return, he told me it wasn't possible. I could tell by his expression that he didn't want me to leave. I told him once more that I wanted to return. He said that if I went back in time, life would be very different and difficult. I took his advice, but I willed myself back into this world. I realized then that this entity is the one and only source, the true God. I remember flying in the air and into my body as I left that heavenly realm and returned to Earth. I was floating down into my body while in the air, looking down at that crash site.